the world's #1 podcasting platform for African stories.
All right, cool. So let's go ahead and get started. As our other speakers join in, we will let them join. I really want to kick off this conversation. Definitely today's talk is really all about growth in podcasting in Africa. We have some amazing co-hosts and speakers for us today. My name is Kevin Y. Brown. I'm the Chief Content Officer and Head of Strategy at Afripods, and we are going to be talking about growth in Africa as far as podcasting goes, but really, from the creator perspective. And so with that being said, I want to open it up to our panelists or speakers and ask you all to introduce yourselves and what organization that you are representing on this here Twitter Spaces. So Bidemi, I see you first here on my screen, so please kick us off. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Bidemi Adedire, and I am the founder of APVA, also known as the Association of African Podcasters and Voice Artists. Thank you.
Adele, then G Money, then Laureen.
Hi, everyone. Happy International Podcast Day. It's such an honor to be here and have such an important conversation. I am the founder of Legally Clueless Africa. We started as a podcast, and now we've grown into a digital media company. So, looking forward to the conversation.
Hey, what's up, everyone? G Money here. I'm a radio presenter in Nairobi. Also a podcaster on the Mics Are Open podcast, which is a podcast out of Nairobi. And also one of the founders of The Good Company, which is a creative company in Nairobi, which creates a lot of digital content. Great to be here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Hello, good evening. This is Laureen Dunga. I am the content manager at SemaBOX, which is a plug and play podcasting studio and podcast incubator. And we provide the space and the skills and technology to turn a podcast idea into reality. And I'm hoping for this session to be enlightening, educative, and let's have fun today. Happy International Podcast Day.
Yes. Thank you all for introducing yourselves, and definitely happy International Podcast Day. My first question that I want to kind of go over with you all is, tell us how long you've been in the podcasting space and what kind of growth you've seen in the space overall in that amount of time. I know you guys' individual stories, haven't had conversations with each of you, but I think it's important for our audience to really understand, the lens that you're operating from, being veterans in the industry in Africa. Anybody can pop out and speak. Okay, Bidemi, can you talk to us and tell us a bit about your experience and how you got in the game?
Yes. Okay, so it's been 3 years now. Not long. But 3 years ago, the space felt somewhat deserted. But today we have many more podcasters, many more people interested in becoming podcasters, which is great. And then I've also seen intentionality. Personally, I've been more intentional about my podcast. And I believe that's something we've seen across, different podcasters in Africa. So we're seeing fewer hobbies, which is a good thing. And then the earning power of the average podcaster has also increased compared to 3 years ago. So this is just my own perspective.
All right. G Money here. So we've been in the space for just over touching 4 years. The growth has been phenomenal. It's actually amazing to see how many people are getting onto getting into podcasting, and also finding ways to monetize and grow their brands and grow their pods. So I still think it's in its nascent stages. We're not even halfway to where we need to be or to where we need to go. But I'm very optimistic that, especially across the continent, we're gonna continue to see a massive growth in podcasting.
I completely agree with G, and I've been in for 3.5 years now. And I have to say, when it hit me that I could make a business out of this, which was like months or close to a year into podcasting, I kind of had a traditional business mindset when it came to like predicting the growth of revenue, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing I underestimated is that 3 years on a digital platform is very different from 3 years in a more traditional platform. So I can only imagine the growth, both in terms of revenue and business opportunities, but also just in terms of Africans who are listening to podcasting. I think there has been a significant growth in people looking for alternatives to radio. Obviously, there's a privilege, there's internet connectivity, but the growth, I think, is there. So that's something that's worth noting.
Well, for me, I've been in this space for, I'd say, maybe 1.5 years. It is not something that I was really familiar with until I think maybe last year, October, when I was in the hustle and bustle of looking for a job. My majors are in film and theater. So in the times of looking for work, and then I came across a production company, which was SemaBOX. And then that is how I came to know about podcasting. Podcasting has been something that it was strange. When I think about it right now, I always just laugh it off because I was so naive about podcasting in a way that the first time I heard of podcasting, it was Apple Podcast. So in my mind, I was like, maybe this is just something that is accessible for iOS users only, the ones who have iPhone. So I was less interested until when now I came to really learn about podcasting, and then now it's more broad. I can understand what podcasting is all about, and being in this space has really made me open my mind, know what people think about, and also because I'm interacting with podcasters almost like in a daily basis. So every day is just a day of learning. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you all for sharing. And I'm going to jump in too because I'm also a podcaster. And so I've been in the game for about 6 years. And I first got my opportunity to see and learn about podcasting in Africa in 2019. And when I came, I went from Senegal to Ghana, and then I came over to Nairobi. And then I had the opportunity to go to Rwanda and some other countries. And so I saw the big opportunity for growth in the industry. And I think in comparison from there and now having lived here for 2 years, I think one of the biggest areas that I see of growth is that is awareness. Right. And then accessibility, like a SemaBOX, or, being able to access someone like a G Money or an Adelle, via social media. Like, you guys are so responsive and knowledgeable, and the open sharing allows for the ecosystem to continue to grow. And then you had something like the APVA Awards, which really just highlighted the fact that people are doing this voice work and are contributing to the ecosystem. With that being said, since we're talking about growth and things like that, I know some of you all have been able to monetize, and even those at SemaBOX, are helping podcasters to monetize. So what statistics are being used in order to determine growth on a year-to-year basis for you all as individual podcasters, but also as companies who are incubating podcasters like a SemaBOX?
Well, it's difficult to obtain accurate data about podcast consumption, and subscribing to a podcast doesn't necessarily equate to consumption. Yeah. So, but one thing that we advise our clients is not to measure their growth based on likes, because there are very many platforms that buy lessons. Anybody can manufacture lessons. There are apps that have been created, platforms that have come up that buy lessons for their podcast. So what we really tell our clients is to engage solely with their listeners. Like, they should be able to, how can I put it? They should not measure the success of the podcast and the listens measuring on the likes that they get, other than the comments from actual active accounts, referrals, and also have you heard of your podcast being mentioned in spaces? Are your links being shared? Something of that sort. I'd say that.
I think for us guys, we've kind of, in terms of monetizing, in terms of analyzing growth, we've kind of created or put in place a hybrid model, because obviously we have a lot of experience in radio sales, how agencies work, and also we are in this space as well. So we took our experiences of how to deal with agencies and how to create for agencies, and sort of bedded it into what we do as podcasters, because it's gonna take. We figured it's gonna take a while before the agencies and the advertisers and the clients catch up with with the growth of the area. And also, I heard today that Afripods rather will be paying creators by the end of the year in Kenya, which is an amazing step, because for many creators, one of the hardest things is to put stuff out there or not know how to monetize. So that's a great step. I heard that this morning. Congratulations, Afripods. That's a real good step in the right direction. So I really think that for us, we've had to have a hybrid model, slightly old school, but still with a foot in the new school way of monetization.
Okay, I kind of want to jump in right there too, because I think that monetization also needs a little bit of framing for those new creators who are coming into space and who are thinking monetization first. Having had the opportunity to have a conversation with Calvin from the Mics Are Open, who's G Money's co-host, and then Adele earlier this morning, I think one of the things for us to really keep in mind as creators is that podcasting is not a situation where you're going to end up with 4 million downloads in 2 months, or typically, right? Anything's possible, and then you end up becoming a millionaire, right? So the expectation around getting paid, I want the creators who are listening to really keep in mind that there are levels to this, right? And so when you look at the typical model of being able to monetize, number one, you definitely want to have your statistics, which is usually found in your dashboard, which can be exported. But also, there usually are 3 tiers, right? Like you have your ambassador ads, which are free. Which you promoting the company that you're using, let's say like your hosting company, and they'll pay you a bit for that. Then you also have when you've reached kind of like a critical mass and you're able to have dynamically inserted ads, right? Dynamic ad insertion, rather, DAI. And then you have when you essentially become like a premium creator, where people are going out, sales reps from the companies are going out, or an agency, and are going out and really going to find you partnership deals. And so you really want to understand that and understand what it takes in order to make it to that level, because podcasting is a grind. And I know for myself, it took me a few years to get my podcast nationally syndicated in the US. And G, from talking to Calvin earlier this morning, he said that it took him 2 years. They took you guys about 2 years to get your first check, which was from Safaricom. And then Adele, earlier you talked about, that it took you about a year and a half in order to reach monetization. But, that direct focus on, that you have something to say, that your story is important, and the work that you're doing is important, is what should drive you. And, having a goal for your show versus coming out of the gate saying, hey, I need to be paid immediately, because you do have to, you do need to be able to, show that people are listening and interacting, as Lorraine was saying. G, please jump in.
Yeah, I agree with you, because at the essence of what we do, and it's not just in podcasting, it's like in anything you do. Like if you're driven by passion, you have to understand that the paycheck it cannot be the main driving factor, because if it is, then you'll find yourself giving up when the money doesn't come in as quickly or in as much as much as you would like it to. Money is important, and it's important, but it shouldn't. It's like I said to someone this morning, like access in terms of creating podcasts now is probably greater than it's ever been. You don't have to have the best mixer, the biggest mixer. You don't even have to have a mixer these days. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So the entry level, and the entry level is not as high as some people would make it seem to be, if that's trying to say. So having said that, the essence should just be about creating, because you have to create your voice, you have to create your content, you have to find your space in this world of content, and then hopefully somebody will notice it and say, okay, these guys are speaking to people that I want to speak to. And if they don't recognize that that you're speaking to their people, it's fine, because what should be driving you is your passion. And that's the way I look at not just podcasting but life. I always say that money comes eventually, but you have to be driven by passion, because that's what keeps you going when there's no money.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think something. Adele, did you have something that you wanted to contribute?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say, I think what also helps is to spend as much time figuring out your value. When it comes to business, people trade in value. And if you can't jump to, oh, I want to make this number of millions or this amount of money before really cracking what your value is. And once you do that, then getting damn good at it, so that when you are asking for a certain amount of money, it almost is a no-brainer because the value is apparent to you and to the advertiser. So you kind of need to spend as much time figuring out your value. And your value sometimes is not that you've got the most streams, right? I mean, they are a lot of indie podcasters, even here in Kenya, who will have an event and you are for sure you'll have between 50 to 100 people. For me, that is like a willing market. That's an audience of 100 actual people. That to me is value. And if I put on my marketing brain, I'm starting to think, okay, how do I plug into that? So you need to spend as much time as possible figuring out what your value is. And it's not necessarily the number of streams you have.
I love that. And, as we're talking about, value and, making sure that you have interaction with your listeners and things like that, I think a very important person to talk about this matter would be Amber. Amber Smith. She's, over community at iHeart and, deals with audio. Can you talk to us? Of course, say hello. Tell us what company you're representing.
Hi.
Huh?
I just said hi. Sorry, I
Oh,
had a little trouble getting on this morning.
no worries.
Super excited to be here. But yeah, as Kevin was saying, I'm the director of audience development for iHeart's podcast network. So my focus is specifically on growth. Like how can we grow our shows, get the best reach, and connect people to our content.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Amber, because you are over audience development, are there any, like, let's say, can you give us 3 tangible ways for new creators and some of us who've been in the game for a while to really maximize and get an uptick in our audiences and the growth of our pods? Are there any things that you've seen that work?
Sure. So one like really quick, like low-hanging fruit strategy is to make sure your content is accessible everywhere. As many places as possible where people are listening. Know where your listeners are. Find out what they're listening to currently. Like what podcasts are they already listening to? Who do you share an audience with? And try and like hit up that podcast and like say, hey, can we co-host on each other's show, introduce our audiences to each other's show, and grow your audience that way by connecting to people that are already listening to podcasts. Another one is to partner with larger media brands. Like if they're running a special on something, or not a special, but like a certain type of content. Say they're doing something on sustainability and your podcast is all about sustainability. Write to them, be like, hey, listen to this episode, my show, I have this guest on, we're talking about this thing, and see if they'll write about it. So those are like 3 kind of like easy ways that are cost effective to reach new audiences.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing that. One of the things that I'm noticing, and I would love for you all to pitch in on this, is that the uptick in podcasters at the moment is not as high as it is in other places throughout the world. And so with that, what, if any, role does the diaspora have to play in podcasting becoming a bigger thing on the continent? And I'll preface that by saying, when we're doing surveys and we're asking about what content people are listening to, a lot of times podcast listeners are listening to content from abroad, and then they are also listening to podcasts in English. Though vernacular podcasts are on the rise and are becoming a bigger thing, you know what I mean? It just, the question warrants is, how do we make podcasting a huge thing on the continent? And what role does the diaspora have to play in helping to build this podcasting ecosystem in Africa, if at all? It doesn't, we may not need the diaspora, but, I would love to hear you all's opinion on that.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in here. I think um, some of the reasons why there is a slower uptake are because there are specific issues that the continent experiences, both in terms of like the economic landscape, priorities because of that are very different, internet penetration, access to a lot of tech or just gadgets or just accessibility, that if you look at other markets, they're probably more advanced than us in that sector. So that's something worth appreciating when we're looking at uptake of podcasts on the continent. I think also there is obviously for Africans in the diaspora, um, we've seen these like a thirst of wanting to connect back with the continent, to kind of like figure out what their roots are. And perhaps they could also, the same way that we've seen the uplifting of African music and the diaspora really played a huge role in that, there is probably space for the diaspora to discover more African podcasts. But then at the same time, you don't also want to govern what somebody consumes entertainment wise. The only caveat that I see is a misrepresentation of the continent and her stories and her people. So you don't want to kind of like slip into a mess where, if you look at the film industry and you have films like Woman King, and there's many Africans who, or African communities who are saying, oh wait, you use these drums, but you call them this, but it's not that, or there was a misrepresentation in language. So there's that kind of caveat, like we don't want to fall in there. And then also you don't want to govern what somebody consumes entertainment wise. But I do think there is a power, and we've seen it with African music, that the African diaspora has in like uplifting and amplifying content and media from home.
Mm. You know, Adele, you said something that's really important, right? And African stories, you know what I mean, oftentimes are misrepresented, right? Or you have other people from other places telling these stories. What are some things that we can actively do as we're working to build the African podcast ecosystem in order to make sure that stories are being told authentically and not being misrepresented, like the example you just gave?
I think we just need not to be lazy and like tap into the actual Africans. If you want to amplify stories by a specific African community, involve that African community. Actually do the legwork and go into those spaces. It's not going to be an easy job, but if you want to honor people's stories, you have to include them in the stories. And honestly, even to some point, let them be the drivers, and you're just kind of creating the space to help them do that best. But what we see is like a very lazy approach of just like one Google search. But like, right, there needs to be more inclusivity of the actual African communities that we want to represent, that we want to amplify, even when it comes to podcasters and creators, right? It's to just create the space and give Africans the tools to then do what they do best. Storytelling is basically in our DNA. So I think that would be like two things I think we could do.
And you know, you said something important: creating space, right? And I think a person on this this panel, who's one of our speakers, did an amazing job in doing that, and also highlighting the triumphs. And I think, Adele, you are a winner of one of the awards. Bidemi, can you talk to us? Tell us a bit about the stats in terms of submissions, and votes that you all received, and then talk to us a little bit more about how you all created the space for authentic African stories, and then also what you see as a solution maybe to the diaspora being able to contribute, you know what I mean, kind of I would say support what is going on in Africa with podcasting and authentic African stories.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Okay, so the African Podcast and Voice Award turned out to be a huge thing, and we're very happy with how it was accepted by, everyone. We're also happy with how it turned out, because it sort of like gave us the sign that we are walking in the right direction. So we had over 2,000 nominations. We had 70,000 votes. We had podcasters represented from across 20 African countries and 4 non-African countries, because we had the diaspora represented as well. So it's actually interesting how we're talking about the role of the diaspora concerning the growth of podcasting in Africa. And podcasting is still very nascent. Osage Alonge, the director of marketing at Keepa and the founder of Visual Audio Times, actually spoke to this question. And I can't help but agree with his thought how there needs to be more stories. There has to be more stories, there has to be more content. We have a lot of society and cultural podcasts. And I feel like if we had more podcasts on politics, we have more podcasts on history, educative podcasts, health and wellness, agriculture. I'm basically listing out some of the categories we couldn't capture, right? I feel like if we have more of our stories being told, and then we can see some level of interconnectivity between the continent and the diaspora. Okay, so we would love to take on more podcast categories because we can. This is a continent. There's a lot to do. Storytelling is in our DNA, just as Adele had mentioned, and I would love to see that as well. So, the African Podcast and Voice Awards has created that platform where we're showing the world that, hey, look, there is so much happening here. Our diversity is our beauty because we are also considering the fact that we need to take on more podcasts that sort of in vernacular, in indigenous languages. So that's something we are also considering. And we can't wait to share all of this amazing, amazing content and stories with the world. And with that being said, I would like to speak to resource mobilization and collaboration. The more we collaborate with brands, the more we boost the relevance of platforms like Afripods, platforms like Niger Podub, APVA, and the award platform itself. These collaborations like this help, boost the relevance of podcasting in Africa. And by that, we can also increase the growth of podcasting as well. And then finally, I would like to say that we need to spruce things up in terms of structure and finesse. One of the things I would love to do is confidently talk about a podcast in Africa, how amazing they are doing because of the structure, because of the system that has been put in place. It makes it easy for us to amplify what is being done, right? Because this is quality, this is standard, and we can rub shoulders with any brand or podcast that's that we see elsewhere.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Bidemi. And when we talk about structure and being able to talk about podcasts, proudly and confidently, I think SemaBOX does a really, really great job here in East Africa with that, right? And they have an incubator called Dada Incubator, which supports women podcasters. And with that, they allow. How many submissions did y'all get this year, Lorraine? Because I'm just speaking on your company, but you are here and you can talk to it. But please tell us a little bit about how SemaBOX goes about making sure that you guys provide top-notch quality for all of the stories that are coming out of your production studio.
So we had the first cohort last year, and we managed to incubate a total of 6 women. That podcast incubator is basically incubation that is solely for women and the non-binary. And this year's cohort, we were looking into expanding into other countries, like outside Kenya, we wanted to do also Uganda and South Africa. So the submissions that were done were over 100, and we are also still in the process of trying to figure out who is really. There are so many captivating stories that people to tell out there, but we really don't have we can't accommodate all of them. So we just try to take the best that we can, nurture it to the best level that it can get to, and then distribute it outside for people to also enjoy what these amazing women have to offer. Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the other things is that SemaBOX is also, you guys have produced over, I think, 700 or 800 episodes for different podcasters. And so you're making a really good contribution to the space. But as we talk about what we can do and kind of move into kind of I guess, what the future of podcasting can look like on the continent, G Money, when you were on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, you talked about the future and making sure that the generations connect. Meaning, millennials with Gen Z and so on and so forth. Can you give us some of that insight into what you see the future of podcasting in Africa looks like?
I think that, I think that telling stories has so many threads there are so many threads, and I was listening earlier to what Adele said and how it's very important to make sure that people have voices and the stories are told. What I think is amazing about podcasting is the fact that essentially, as much as we're all telling stories, we're all telling stories in very different ways. And I think podcasting um, is going to be the way rather, in which especially young people get a chance to tell us what their stories are, what their hopes are, fears. I'll give you an example. For our podcast, the mics are open. I used to think to myself, what do we stand for? What do we do? What is it about us? Because I could always see, I'd like, Adele is giving people voices. These people are doing that. Some were just speaking to Gen Z. What is the role of the mics are open within the whole fabric of podcasts? Connected? All right, hold on. Let me get back online. Hello, are we connected? Hello?
Yes, we're
I think
we're
I'm
we're we're,
there for a moment. Hello?
we're
Kevin, did you leave?
yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I think I just moved in the house. I came off of Wi-Fi. So,
No worries.
I was saying that I think the role of podcasting is to allow everyone to tell their stories in all different ways. So I used to worry about, what is the mics are open about? And I realized the mics are open is just giving 4 people or 5 people or whoever's on set just a chance to talk nonsense. And if that's part of their story, that's part of their story in that particular moment. In terms of the future of podcasting, there's space for all different types of journeys, all different types of stories. The most important thing is we just have to keep on encouraging people into the space, getting people into the space, and holding their hands if we can. Not everybody wants their hands to be held, but just opening doors and letting people know that, this is something that you can do as well. Making it a little bit, just making it more open and more accessible, I think.
Doris, I saw that Doris just joined us. I think she's still connecting. But does anyone else have any ideas around what the future of podcasting in Africa looks like?
Yeah, absolutely agree with what G has said, but I also think something else that podcast has the potential to fully do is to take back power from the dubious places that it's placed on the continent and place it back in Africans' hands. So if we talk about conversations around leadership, around politics, a lot of traditional or legacy media on the continent are compromised. And this is the same for other continents as well. They are compromised, there's a bias. And so now, if you look at podcasts, this is like independent media that can even be created from the ground up, like in those actual communities. In real time, we can get to, just think about it, we could get to evaluate the progress of our leaders in real time and get to hear the thoughts and the voices of young Africans in real time on matters, politics, and leadership. If you look at issues around health, it's the same situation. If you look at even misrepresentation, one thing that we did with our tour series is to go to Zimbabwe, Harare, and that was one of, the pieces of content or episodes that made it very clear to me that, oh, this is why I'm doing this thing. Because for a long time, we've consumed content or stories or media around Zimbabwe that had an agenda and it had a Western lens. But going there on ground as an African, I got to understand, like, there's so much value. Are there political issues? Yes, but which country doesn't have that? Are there economic issues? Yes, but which country doesn't have that? And there's a lot of really good, inspiring things from that country, but those stories have never been told, not even by our own traditional media. So I think when we look at the future of podcasting, there is a true and honest power to be that this platform has to take back the power from the dubious corners and place it back in Africans' hands. The only thing that I then fear about it is that, the people in government are not dumb. So if they see this power, if they clock onto it, there could be restrictions. So I'm trying to think ahead and trying to figure out, okay, what would that kind of look like? How do we avoid that as those of us on the continent creating? But man, there is so much power in podcasting for the continent.
Thank you for sharing that, Adele. I think we're talking about the power, and I think one person that I should have included or pinpointed in this diaspora talk is Amber, because Amber is actually working on the side in the United States, right? And forgive me, y'all, but I think that everybody who is Black is is African descent, so I consider us all to be Africans or Pan Africanists. But Amber, from what you've seen, having the opportunity to have met us and had in-depth conversations with us at Podcast Movement about what's going on in Africa, what are some ways that we can engage, from the Western world to the continent in order to make sure that we're contributing responsibly to make sure that we're growing the ecosystem or even the future of podcasting here? And I asked that, like I said on the panel at Podcast Movement, not from we're coming to save Africa perspective, which is often a thing, which is what Adele is talking about, but from a how can I support and be around, like Bidemi said, around in order to help to create the space and just kind of be a supporter instead of the leader.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's been really a pleasure to sit here and listen to everyone else on this panel speak, because I'm learning so much about what you guys are doing. But and I mentioned this before, you said a lot about like Africans listening to content from the US as far as podcasting goes. But if there are any ways, and Kevin, we talked about this with Camilla from SiriusXM as well when we connected at Podcast Movement, how do we get your content onto our platforms in the US so that we can connect with your content and amplify it from our platforms? Like, what are those ways? Is it YouTube? Is it, is there ways in which we can get African podcasts on like the SiriusXM platform, like ways that we can kind of like hack the system? Because podcasting is still the wild west. It is really powerful for that reason. So how can we connect our audiences with your content? I think could be one really powerful way to support the growth of podcasting in Africa.
Okay. No, I love that. And so I'm kind of going to piggyback because, when we talk about promo swaps, I think that's one of the best ways in order to really make sure that what's happening over here gets in over there. Like, think about it, all of those collaborations with, artists from the continent, even Afrobeats and things like that with, a Chris Brown or other artists and things like that in order to raise the profile of the stories that are being told. And I think that one of the other things that is important for everybody on this call to know is that a lot of times, man, conversations are happening without us even being in the room, right? And it's about the amazing things that are happening on the continent. Like Adele, we talk all the time. G Money, we talk all the time. You know what I mean? I'm like, hey, like there's conversations happening where I'm like, we might be speaking to somebody at SiriusXM or at iHeart, like Amber, and we're talking about you guys. You know what I mean? Not about your talent and what it is that you're contributing. In order to make sure that crossover is happening and that it's happening responsibly. As I love, Adele, that you continue to focus in on that, is that there is no, there should be no misrepresentation, and that there should definitely be authenticity, and it should be being told by the person who's living the experience and who has lived the experience of being African on the ground when it comes to authentic stories. So with that being said, my next question for everybody on the panel is, how do we increase the number of podcast creators and listeners on the continent? Like, what can we do, us who are here, and then also those who might come in and listen later on? How do we increase, the industry as of right now?
Okay, sorry. Let me jump in. I have such strong thoughts about this, and I think it's like in the unsexy bits. So it's in, sorry to sound like somebody from like the NGO world, but like capacity building and upskilling. It really is in those very unsexy corners where when we talk about actually giving Africans skills to create their own podcasts, even just technically, that's so important. It's in, yes, we're talking about we need storytelling, or we need more content that's in our vernacular languages, or on politics, on health. Regardless of what type of content you're creating, you have to build sustainable content. So it's in giving those skills of how do we ensure that the content that's coming out is sustainable? How do we empower the podcasters to be able to do that? So that's on the creation bit. And then it's in also roping in tech. It's wild. Like, Kenya is such a hub when it comes to tech and innovation. I think some of the issues we face as creators, we can come up with the solutions ourselves here. So how do we tap into tech hubs and start to rope them in, even when it comes to understanding the insights, understanding, developing tools that are more localized for us? We can't sit and just wait for the West to bring it to us. We can also start innovating. I mean, we've been doing that across the board, right? And then it also means, oh, this is like the icky part, but it's so important. And I know SemaBOX and Baraza Media Lab are keen on this. It's like, how do we then engage with policymakers? Unfortunately, we can't go around that. So to ensure that we have a healthy ecosystem for as many years to come, we have to make sure that the people who could potentially like F that up are on board, and we're kind of like telling them that, hey, this is what this ecosystem needs from a policy level, from a government level, right? Do not overtax, do not do this, perhaps think about doing this. And even policy when it comes to education. So one thing I did before the lockdown is go back to my alumni, which is USIU here in Kenya, and work with the journalism lecturers to start running podcasting workshops in universities alongside what they're learning, you know, when it comes to journalism. The skills that are given on that level in terms of like a tertiary level need to be the skills that are needed in present day markets. So it's figuring out our education system. It is engaging with the policymakers. I hate that part, but it's important. And then it's upskilling the actual creators.
Can I jump in there
Okay.
real quick? Let me jump in there real quick.
Please.
I think that I'm a great proponent of meeting people where they are. And, you know, we have to also be very honest with ourselves that, like, not everybody who is going to start a podcast is in the position that we are in. You know, the kid who's going to start is to do a podcast in who lives in Kibera, who's facing whatever kind of stress. I always use the example of a young podcaster that I know who records his podcast on his phone under his duvet when the house is quiet at night. So people are at different stages and different spaces. So if we're going to really increase the listenership and increase the power and the scope of podcasting, it's important for us to understand what our role is. So when I speak about Adelle, about her behind her back, because we haven't had lunch for the longest while, Adelle. But whenever I speak about Adelle, I say Adelle.
We'll change that.
Adelle has tapped into a space that at this precise moment in this present iteration of what I'm doing, I couldn't do. All right. But at the same time, us guys will tap into the space. The sandwich will pop it. The mic checks will tap into a space somewhere else that Adelle can't tap into. So the reality is we meet people where they are. And the key thing, and as Adelle has just said, it's like, you know, opening those, holding their hands of these people who want to be helped. Sometimes, you know, I'm speaking to guys who want to start a podcast, and like there's such a lack of opportunity for where they are. They can't walk into SemaBOX. They can't go to Baraza. They can't even walk into my studio. But it's for us to meet them where they are and give them the core principles where they are and assist them to get that first step. Because sometimes it's so easy for us to take for granted the access that we have, realizing that we have to grow even the grassroots as well, you know?
No, I love that. Thank you, Jim.
If I could just add to what Adelle and Jimani said, it all ratios down to incubation, and this is what SemaBOX is really trying to adopt. Like for creators, most people, as you've said, don't know where to start from when it comes to podcasting. Because one, they lack the knowledge on where to begin, and they don't even know how to go about it. I am the person who is always on the forefront when receiving new podcasters here when they want to start to do their episodes. I receive the calls. They're always asking, "Oh, I don't know how this podcasting thing is supposed to be done. What am I supposed to do? Are you going to be directing us? Are you giving us time to prep before the actual recording? And I mean, they are so very clueless. And then, I mean, after we've given them, like, let's say, recording for, like, say, 1 to the 3rd episode, they catch up really fast. And then you realize that this is just something inbuilt. It's just that they do not have the platform to air out their ideas or share, and also for financial constraint, also to put up a studio. Like Jimani said, someone from Kibera, they'll just use their phone. But now, as we see now, the podcasting is growing, and quality is also important. You cannot compare the quality of an audio recorded by phone compared to that one of a studio. Yeah. So this is where incubation comes in. To begin a podcast, we also encourage them to like talk about something else other than how can I put it? Instead of using English, we encourage most of them to do Swahili. We even had one Somali podcast here, and it was one of the biggest podcasts at SemaBOX.
Mm-hmm.
It had large following, yeah, and it was also accepted. Most of the listeners were mainly from abroad. We could
Right.
get the statistics on our end. Most of the listeners were from the US, from the UK mostly, because that's where Somalis are majorly there. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Lorraine. I think what I'm hearing is accessibility from what G said, meeting people where they are, right? And, that's one of the reasons why Afripods exists. And one of the reasons why Afripods is actually a free hosting platform at the moment, right? Is so that it doesn't matter whether or not you're in the bush, or you're in the city, or you're in the coast, you can upload to Afripods and actually, make your voice go global, worldwide, for people to hear what it is that you have to say. And, that's just a key fundamental of making sure that this platform and that this that this platform of podcasting is accessible, because I believe that podcasting is a low cost way to preserve the history, the culture, the language, and the traditions of Africans, so that future generations can have an authentic experience, right? And with that, I think one of the other hurdles that we have to attack, and I would like everybody on the panel to really address this particular thing that I'm going to say. I think one of our big hurdles is that we might be seeing, and I'm saying might because we're still doing research, but from what we're finding is that Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa haven't come together just yet in order to grow this space community-wise. And I think that that is a space for opportunity. So my second to last question on this panel for everybody is, can you provide, just 1 to 2 ideas that you may have each for us to grow the Francophone and Anglophone podcasting communities so that we all can work together in order to build the ecosystem as a whole? Adele. Nobody
All
jumped out.
right. So that's so important. And it's something that I've been thinking about ever since being in a conference that was evaluating the relationship between France and Africa. And so that was the first time that I was a minority as an English speaker, and having to kind of claw my way through French. And so one thing we have to think about is accessibility, also in terms of language. And so what are some of the tools that we can use, dependent on the format your podcast or your digital content takes, to be able to be accessible to Francophone Africa? Another thing to look at is cross-promotion and collaboration. So how can we have more collaboration between, say, podcasters in Kenya and podcasters in Senegal? How can we have joint workshops? Language should not be a barrier between us be able to do things. A third thing that's very important, and I think this is something to think about as we have the bigger conversation of like visa issues, etc., is to have a lot more of the podcast conferences on the continent, because then we are in charge of who comes, and that means that we can then be intentional if it's in Francophone Africa countries to be able to invite those from English-speaking countries, or vice versa. And then we also have to just like be very aware that the reason there is this divide is that it was intentionally, very violently done from our past. And so we need to confront that as well, so that we can figure out what the solution kind of looks like. It would be, and the reason I say this is just even optics. So for example, if we say we're going to have a podcast conference in Kenya, and we're inviting people from different Francophone African countries, but it is sponsored by a French organization. That's a bit strange, you know. We might not see it as that because our violent past is very directly linked to the British. So we kind of have to be very sensitive as well to our respective pasts and what caused this divide, so that when we're creating the spaces that bring us together, we don't end up making the situation worse. But I think there really needs to be more collaboration. We have to think about how do we make our content more accessible to those who speak a different language from us. And then, man, like, I think we can have those conferences here. So I know there's people from Baraza Media Lab on this space. I'm super excited about the African Media Festival. That's one place to start. So how do we have a lot more creators from Francophone Africa coming and having that organic collaboration being birthed at such spaces?
Thank you, Adele. Does anyone else please chime in? I mean, you all are doing amazing work and are on the ground. Bidemi, I know you were getting submissions from all over the continent. You travel all the time. You know what I mean? You all have important perspectives that we need to hear. Amber, yes?
Yeah, so I think Adele brings up a lot of like historical context that I don't have, which is amazing. But one thing that we've done in the States, specifically at iHeart, we have a network called My Cultura that's focused on the Latin American community and growing like listenership there. And a lot of their shows, they'll have them in both languages, in English and Spanish. So you can reach kind of like the larger community there. And I don't know if that's an option for every episode of every show of a publisher in Africa that you guys are doing, but maybe having one episode a month that's like, or one episode every quarter that's like in a different language, in French or in English, vice versa, so that you can kind of connect to those audiences that speak a different language.
Mm-hmm. Amazing idea.
It's a good idea. I think also, like as Adele touched on, it's like one of those ones where, you know, a company like Afripods, and you guys are so perfectly placed in terms of having a continental view on what's happening across the entire continent. So I think it's like for and as you are doing already as thought leaders and as people who are looking to preserve the culture of storytelling, I think that's where leadership comes in as well, because at the same time, you know, as much as we all want to come together, we all have we may have common issues and common problems, but culturally there are differences and language differences, like, you know, everyone has said as well. So I just think it's like the idea of, like, you know, growing all of the various growing podcasting wherever it's found on the continent with an overview towards bringing it together at some point, or providing the logistics, or I don't know, some way for guys to connect at that next level.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Kimani. Thank you so much. This particular question about languages, I recall T-Code is here listening to this session, and I'm happy he's here because we've had this discussion about languages. And thankfully, I attended a feedback workshop on strengthening the West African philanthropy support ecosystem. And I found out that we had English civil society actors and the French, but it was not a problem during the feedback workshop because we were able to communicate using Zoom. So if someone that is speaking in French is actually speaking maybe at the moment, I'm actually listening in English real time. And then when I'm speaking, that person is listening in his own language or her language real time as well. I feel like we can make use of tech to achieve this. But then again, we should also extend. So this is for me personally now. So it's something we are going to do in APVA is extend, hands of partnership to communities that are coming up. There's the Angola Podcast Hub. Okay, I recently found out, and I am looking forward to working with the community so that we can have conversations like this. We can lead dialogues like this. We can start working together using tools that are already available, for conferences or Twitter spaces like this, and hear each other. And languages will no longer be a barrier anymore.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Great. This is my last question for the panel. And the reason why I want to ask this question is because I think that, while the first question that we always get is how do I make money from creators? And because you all are veterans in the industry here in Africa, are veterans in the industry, period, can you leave us with one innovative way that you have used to grow your podcasting business specifically? G Money, take us away, and then everybody else can answer.
Wow. One specific thing that we have done to grow our audience, apart from mentioning our podcast and our radio shows, no, what have we done? It's interesting. I mean, what we've done stuff on the ground. So, for example, like we've done events where it's not necessarily about podcasting. It's like just taking a group of, maybe we took 1,000 of our listeners for a walk in the forest, which is completely different from what we do normally via the podcast. But we were able to mobilize 1,000 of our listeners, and in just the space of a week or so, we partnered with an insurance company and we did a whole 10K and walk. It's not a very novel way of growing your audience, but at least for that day, you own the space and the conversation on social media just because of the volume of people who have come through. Apart from that, one of the ways that we've grown our audience, and one of the ways that is very, very, I think, crucial for all podcasters, is that we introduced a segment on the show where we start now getting people to send in what they want us to talk about. So a good 60 maybe percent of the stuff, of the nonsense we talk about and the good stuff we talk about, is actually crowdsourced. So I guess those are a couple of ways in which you can get your audience more involved.
Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree with G on that. I think one thing that I will say is there is value in the traditional. So there's value in radio because I think it's one of those it's one media format that knows how to make money. The budgets might be cut, but when it comes to like getting to that gray area between content and where the money comes in, there's so much value. And I always say, spend as much time listening to radio, not to the music. But when G Money starts selling something, turn the volume up. When you listen to the spot ads, when you listen to features, turn the volume up, because then you can start working backwards, even in terms of your podcast and trying to find the value pockets in yours. So I think that's one thing that I do say, don't throw the entire radio thing out. There's like still some value to help you innovate a revenue model. Also in that breath, I think what's also important, when you listen to radio, you hear a lot of listeners' voices, and it feels good. It makes such good audio. It makes for such a good audio experience, good content, because sometimes the hosts are just reacting to this crazy caller, whether it's staged or not, etc. And it speaks to inclusivity. So how do you make your audience involved? And G-Money has spoken to that. And I think what we did very early with the Legally Clueless podcast is to set up a hotline using WhatsApp. WhatsApp is big in Africa. Use the voice note feature. People send in voice notes when they're reacting to an episode, and then taking it a step further and saying, hey, we're based around storytelling. I want to be able to, wherever you are in the world as an African, how do I record your story, right? And so people send in either voice note demos, or they fill out a form if they want to share their story on the podcast. So it helps refine the process of you gathering content and including your audience. And then it just kind of grows your community because they feel like they're part of something. And so it might not be, oh, I've discovered and built the next meta, but it's using tools that are from a very traditional format and tweaking them to make them make sense for your platform.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, an engaged audience is super powerful when it comes to monetizing your show and when it comes to growing your show, period. The more that you have audience engagement, like the better, the more valuable you are to companies trying to spend money on your show. And according to Edison research, it's still the number one way that that podcasts are discovered is through word of mouth. So if you have people talking about your show because they're so engaged in it, and like that's the magic of podcasts too, people feel like they're a part of it, they're part of the conversation, they're part of the community. The more you can involve your audience in that, like either responding to them on social media or taking in voice notes and having like an audience driven episode where you're answering their questions, and are giving them content to share too. Are you creating audiograms? Are you creating shareable content that they can then share on their platforms or with their folks? I think is really key.
Okay.
Yeah. One question that we mostly get whenever someone is wants to start a podcast is, how am I going to get money from this podcast, and how long is it going to take? Now, the thing is, most of the podcasters, they don't really have they really don't want to wait. They want the quick money. But what we tell them is your content and your engagement is what will really make you earn out of your talent. So some of our podcasters, they've even been able to attract certain organizations to an extent where they funded the rest of the episodes even to the next season. So it's really what you talk about in your podcast. You really don't know who's listening until you get the feedback.
Yeah. No, definitely. Audience engagement matters. Calls to actions matter, and definitely getting that feedback is key. So with that being said, I hope everybody who is a creator, who is an aspiring creator, and who is in the business of podcasting definitely takes away those tips that you all were able to give. I want to say on behalf of Afripods, thank you, everyone, for being a part of this. Oh, one more thing. Can everybody please just say how our audience that, attended today or will listen to this recorded later can get in contact with you or stay abreast of what it is that you're up to? So starting with Adelle, Bidemi, G Money, Amber, Lorraine.
So for specifically Legally Clueless Africa, you can find us at legallycluelessafrica.com. There's a contact tab, and you can be able to talk to us a bit more if you're looking for collaborations, and you can explore our podcast, our video series, tour series, sign up for our community, our workshop, and our events.
Hi, you can find us at APVA.Africa. We are looking to connect with you all. We're on Twitter as APVA Official and Instagram as well. So thank you so much for your support, everyone. Thank you.
Alrighty, for us guys, we are on all socials at the Mics Are Open podcast. Specifically, the company is called The Good Company. You can check us out at thegoodcompany.co.ke. We're not hard to find.
Okay. Amber.
And
Go ahead.
for SemaBOX, we are on all social media. On Instagram is SemaBOX_Africa, and on Twitter it's SemaBOX Africa at SemaBOX.
Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My email is amber.c.smi@gmail.com. I'm also on all the socials, probably Instagram the most, and that's Amber C Smith _.
Okay, great. Thank you all. And for us, you can find us on all platforms at Afripods, AFRIPODS. Panelists and speakers, thank you so much for being a part of the spaces and sharing your genius around Africa's podcasting growth. and how we can continue to grow this space. So thank you all for a lovely conversation.
Kevin, just a minute. One most important thing I forgot about.
Mm-hmm.
Website, it's SemaBOX.net. That's where we'll find all the packages of how we offer our services at SemaBOX here. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, thank you for that. And thank you all for being a part of International Podcast Day. More importantly, Africa International Podcast Day. Have an amazing day. Quiety.